Welcome back to the battle camp. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about a little bit today was this kind of story bubbling on Twitter and YouTube that I've noticed, where people are speculating about Sky Sports being unhappy with Eddie Hearn because the level of content that Eddie Hearn is putting out via Sky Sports, or basically the shows that he's putting on, aren't to the level or the standard that Sky Sports have come to expect of Eddie Hearn or from boxing in general. So a lot of people have been discussing this, and there was even a little kind of 1 or 2 minute piece where Kugan Cassius was talking to Eddie Hearn, and kind of Adam Smith, who's the head of boxing at Sky Sports, came in and discussed the Kugan Cassius actually just asked him the question, are you happy with Eddie Hearn? I'm paraphrasing it. And Adam Smith didn't just brush that off. He kind of just said, "No, I keep an eye on Eddie Hearn, and we argue sometimes, and I need to keep on top of him and really make sure that he kind of does his best for us." And because Sky Sports have a duty to the fans of boxing, which is a noble way to think about things. But I think people were taken aback by the fact that Adam Smith kind of didn't deny when asked the question whether he was unhappy with Eddie Hearn. So I got to thinking about this, because in my head I thought to myself, what the fuck? Where is this coming from? Boxing is at the highest kind of level of interest it's had from a UK public point of view that I can remember since I've been watching boxing over the last 10 or 15 years. I can remember years ago when Carl Froch was fighting for world titles, and no one gave a flying fuck. I remember when he fought, what was his name? Pascal? Joseph? Was not Joseph Pascal. The French Canadian. He's a black guy. Fuck, why have I not remembered his name? Joe something Pascal. You know what? While I'm making this video, you're gonna sit here and wait for me to go on Wikipedia and look at Carl Froch's Wikipedia page, so I can pull up his boxing record and you guys can watch me. Jean Pascal, I knew it was Pascal, which is on the 6th of December 2008. So fuck me, that was just over 10 years ago. But yeah, I remember watching that fight on TV, and it was on ITV2 or ITV4. I don't even think it was on the main ITV channel. Now, if a fight of that magnitude for a world title, the WBC title, and I didn't know that off the top of my head, I can see that on Wikipedia, so I just want to put that out there. But if a fight of that magnitude was being televised now, there's no way it would be on, ITV2. It'd be on ITV1. Does that make sense? And that's just because of the growth in popularity of boxing in the UK. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. I personally think social media played a massive role in this, and especially IFL TV, who I think have done a massive service to boxing here in the UK, because the amount of views they get and the amount of kind of interest let me rephrase that. The amount of views they get and the way they interview fighters, it allows us to become familiar with these fighters and kind of get to know them away from the ring, which makes us more interested in their fights when they fight, if that makes sense. So anyway, let me stop banging on about that. But that was just an example of a high level fight that happened, and it was a fucking good fight, if I remember correctly. It was a proper war. But it was on ITV2. So yeah, so I'm just kind of trying to give you an example of where boxing used to be 10 years ago and where it is at the moment. So if we kind of look at last year, just on Sky Sports, I got another tab open here where I kind of just googled what were the kind of Sky Sports box office, what were the pay-per-view events that Sky Sports put on last year. And there were a total of 6 events. So it was Joshua vs Joseph Parker, and then Hay vs Bellew 2, then White vs Joseph Parker, then Joshua vs Povetkin, then Usyk vs Bellew, and then Dillian White vs Derek Chisora. So there's a reoccurring theme here where you've got Joshua, Dillian Whyte, and Tony Bellew, kind of bona fide pay-per-view stars, and they were able to create enough interest and hype in the people they fought to put on 6 pay-per-view events. And I'd say that was probably the most successful year Sky Sports have had from a pay-per-view standpoint. But I think the conjecture, and that's a new word that I've learnt recently, and I'll probably use it in every single one of my videos, but the conjecture around Sky Sports' supposed unhappiness with Eddie Hearn is twofold. One, it's around the potential or the pay-per-view fights that are going to be put on the platform this year. So we had 6 fights last year, and 2 of them involved Tony Bellew, and obviously he's no longer an active fighter. So who's going to headline these pay-per-view fights? You'd imagine if Anthony Joshua is fighting Big Baby Miller in the States, that'll mean that the pay-per-view numbers for that Joshua fight will take a massive hit. And obviously Sky Sports were banking on an April 13 fight in Wembley against a big name opponent for Anthony Joshua. So they were probably forecasting that will be their biggest ever pay-per-view event in terms of pay-per-view buyers. And that looks like it's not going to come to fruition now. So that could be a bone of contention. The other thing is Dillian Whyte currently kind of publicly stating he's unhappy. Although that seems to have died down a little bit, and it looks like he's going to be headlining a pay-per-view in April. But Dillian Whyte headlining a pay-per-view against, a Povetkin or Dominic Breazeale or Luis Ortiz, whoever he's going to fight, won't probably do half the numbers that a Joshua fighting a big name would have done. Even I'll include Dillian Whyte in that big name. So Joshua, it looked like he was going to fight Dillian Whyte, but an outside chance of Wilder or Tyson Fury. So Dillian Whyte headlining that card, obviously it's going to do numbers, but not the kind of numbers that a Joshua vs Dillian Whyte would have done. And then you'd have to imagine that Joshua's probably got one more fight in him this year, and will it be against Wilder or Fury? Will that happen? Because them two are fighting each other. It looks like in June or something like that, and presumably there'll be a rematch of that fight if Tyson Fury wins. So you can't bank on any of those two fighting Joshua this year, because it looks like they'll just be fighting each other this year. So in terms of pay-per-view, you've got obviously Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte, who could potentially headline pay-per-views, but who else is there? Sky Sports thought they were getting Kell Brook against Amir Khan. That doesn't look like it's going to happen now that Khan's going over to America to fight, how the fuck have I forgotten his name? He's only one of the best boxers in the world, Terence Crawford. Khan's going over to fight Terence Crawford, so that fight that they thought they were going to have with Brook and Khan, that's not happening. But if we take a step back from the pay-per-view scene and fighters that are able to headline a pay-per-view show, I just kind of went through the in my head fighters that have kind of been prominent on Matchroom shows and have headlined Saturday night fight night. So they've I think the quality of the Saturday night fight nights over here in the UK has been quite good over the last couple of years. That's because they've had fighters like Kell Brook, Ricky Burns, Anthony Crolla, Luke Campbell, even Tommy Coyle to an extent. The McDonald brothers, Tony Bellew wasn't always fighting on pay-per-view. George Groves was part of some of these fight nights and kind of propped up the undercard on pay-per-view shows. And I know James DeGale wasn't fought quite a lot in the States. He didn't really fight here in the UK. But a lot of those fights, majority of the fights, were shown on Sky Sports as well. I remember staying up to watch the Royal fight and watched DeGale win that belt, win that world title for the first time. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is the current generation of boxing stars, domestic boxing stars here in the UK, they're all at the tail end of their career. So when you look ahead to the future, the guys that I've just named, they're kind of in the last year or the last 2 years of their boxing kind of career, of their boxing days. And then when you look at what Eddie Hearn and Matchroom have from a UK standpoint in current boxers that can headline these shows, and I know all of these guys that I mentioned earlier haven't retired, but they're not someone that you can um, build your brand on over the next couple of years, because you know that they're going to retire soon, if that makes sense. So someone like an Anthony Crolla, he's been prominent on their kind of fight night shows over the last 2 or 3 years, but he's not going to be around for another 2 or 3 years. And it looks like he's kind of trying to get a payday or two from his last couple of fights, and maybe call it a day. I don't know. I don't want to kind of speculate without having all the information to hand. I don't know what Crolla's going to do, and he's got every right to do whatever he wants to do. He's earned it, but I can't see him continuing on for much longer. He's been world champion. He's lost the title. Is there really much else for him to do, you know? So going back to what I was going to say before, the current stars that Matchroom have on their books, and the only one I can, or there's only a couple that I can really think of, obviously apart from Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua, but these two guys aren't going to be fighting on Saturday night fight nights for much longer. But I can think perhaps Callum Smith, but even him, he's probably going to want to be a pay-per-view star, so he's going to be trying to make that jump up from being a Saturday night fight night type of fighter to headlining pay-per-views of his own, if that makes sense. So I don't know, like looking at the current crop of people that they have, you'd have to probably say Kao Yafai. He's a world champion. He could probably headline a Saturday night fight night, but I don't know whether he's got the backing or like the kind of whether he's popular with the fans that he can sell out arenas. Charlie Edwards, who recently won a title, but again he's kind of really kind of come into prominence since he won that fight, and the backstory with him, but it wasn't like but yeah, he wasn't headlining shows before. Can he do it now? You got Katie Taylor, who seems to be fighting in the States quite often. I suppose she could headline Saturday night fight night shows. Callum Johnson is another name of someone that's kind of at a level where he can be fighting world level competitors and above European level competitors and being meaningful fights on a Saturday night fight night. And apart from that, you don't really have anyone at the level where they're able to headline Saturday fight nights. What we do have is people that are on the cusp of being these kind of fighters that can fight at I'd call it kind of between European and world level, so kind of top 15, I'd say. You've got people that can fight those type of fights, and that's kind of the Joshua Baratzis of the world, or maybe even Lawrence Okoli, who Lawrence Okoli's kind of stunk the place out a little bit, and he's a bit inconsistent in the right word, because he's so kind of he doesn't really have a lot of experience, so he's learning on the job, so it's difficult, and it's not fair on him to kind of push him in that direction, just because Sky Sports need people to headline these shows, but that pressure seems like it's going to kind of fall on his shoulders. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is, before we had a plethora of boxers that were able to headline these shows, and at the moment we're in between. We have people at the tail end of their career, and then people that are just kind of approaching that level, and then we've got the Cheesemans and the Ritsons of the world, who are trying to step up to European level, and they both failed recently. Now, I'd imagine, if we weren't in a position where there was a lack of boxers that could headline these shows, I don't think Cheeseman or Ritson would have been thrust into the fights that they were this early on, if that makes sense. So, if this was like 3 or 4 years ago, when all those names that I rattled off before were still active, I'd imagine what we'd have is Cheeseman still fighting kind of on the undercard of a show, I don't know, headlined by Anthony Crolla, um, and being able to kind of cut his teeth and have a couple of more fights before he fought someone at European level, and the same with Lewis Ritson. So there's been a bit of a, and it's, you can't really call it a mismanagement, because you can't control the crop of you can't control how talented your crop of current boxers are. I think we actually had a bit of a golden generation previously, with all the different boxers that we had come through, win world titles, headline kind of shows, and um, the talent kind of pool that the country produced was really, really good, considering these are just fighters that are signed to Matchroom, you know. So it's a difficult situation, and I don't even think I've really addressed the fucking question that I've been that I kind of started off talking about Sky Sports being unhappy with Eddie Hearn. What I'm trying to do is foresee what they're going to be doing over the next year or two, and what they need to do is build these stars, build these boxers into stars. And at the moment, with Whitson at the end of last year, and Cheeseman this Saturday just gone, they've they've kind of not had the results they wanted. You can't really put the blame onto the promoter for putting on those fights, because obviously these fighters have trainers and managers that agreed to these fights happening. So they obviously thought they had a fair chance of winning those fights, which is why they were made. But I just think at the moment we're a little bit thin on stars that are at a current level, that are able to headline these Saturday night fight night shows, and that's an issue. If you couple that with Bellew retiring, Joshua fighting in the States, it looks like in June, from a pay-per-view front, I don't think it will be, the year won't be as successful as it was last year. So there are problems, and maybe there's an argument that Eddie Hearn is spreading himself too thin, with all the activities in America. He signed a lot of fighters, kind of European fighters like Usyk, and you got Bivol, and people like that. And these guys are looks like they're going to be fighting on the zone in the States. So Sky Sports aren't going to reap the benefits of having those guys on the Matchroom roster. So I suppose that could be a bit of a bit of an issue with Sky Sports, because it seems like the international talent that Matchroom are signing aren't actually being showcased here in the UK in a prime time slot for Sky Sports Boxing. So you can see reasons as to why Sky Sports may not be happy with Eddie Hearn, and you can understand why there's this conjecture and that word again, why there's this conjecture and why there's the speculation about it all. And it will be interesting to see what what Eddie Hearn is going to do to turn this around. Now, whether he's sat down with Adam Booth, Adam Smith, and discussed all of this with Adam Smith and said, look, we need a year or two to rebuild and kind of get this current crop of youngsters up to a level that will benefit us in terms of putting on kind of shows that gather the interest that previous shows used to, and building these boxes into pay-per-view kind of stars. Whether they've had that discussion or not, because like I said, you can't control how good the talent is in the country, if that makes sense. Like, I just think we got lucky with the previous crop of stars that we had. But I think it's doable. I think in terms of what they currently have on their roster, I think they can sprinkle kind of cards with boxers kind of at the tail end of the career, along with kind of these new guys, and kind of prop up these cards and put on some decent shows, and enough shows with enough names that people recognize and tune in for, and hopefully build up these stars kind of on the back end. And also, I think what they need to do is, I know Dave Allen's going to be on the undercard for the pay-per-view show that Dylan White's supposedly doing on April 20th. But I definitely would start using Dave Allen as a Saturday night fight kind of guy, because oh fuck me, he's got a lot of support, and you could probably get him in some decent fights, and you could headline shows and sell out arenas with that guy. And I don't know, I think it's important to sell pay-per-views, but also it's important to um, get some of the spotlight on these younger guys. And the way to do it, in my humble opinion, is to put names on the cards on Saturday night on Sky Sports, and people like Dave Allen, even David Price, rather than propping up pay-per-view cards with them. I think it's important to get these kind of names on these Saturday night fight nights. I think I was all over the place with this video because I haven't actually written anything down. I usually try and make notes, and then kind of stick to those kind of bullet points that I've got in my notes, but I didn't bother this time. It probably shows. But let me know what your thoughts are. Feel free to share your comments and views, and I'll respond back if you're not talking absolute shit. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.